Hey guys, wanted to talk about something that's been on my mind a bit. Just wanted to see what you guys thought of it. This sort of stuff ever gone through your head before. So, cluster A peeps in general, whether labeled schizoid or schizotypal or paranoid or whatever, many of us used to have a place in society, I feel. Many of us used to have a spot in different cultures at different times and different labels. The ability to abstract information and look at the meta of what human beings are doing amongst each other, or what our stories are, our understanding of the self is, whether, in a more modern sense or spiritually or religious, or the way texts were interpreted in kind of very abstract fashions, the way art was progressed along non-normative lines over the years, and in turn, usually posthumously, affected the paradigm of that particular craft or what have you, as well as in the sciences and in every realm, whatever realm was popular or more or less acceptable to take part in during various places in time in human history. Oftentimes, the positions that people like ourselves would take were the ones that would get us either, murdered on the street or burnt at the stake or turned into a pariah until, again, posthumously, there's some kind of revelation amongst the masses, or those who would look at your work or your interests or your words and then decide, oh, maybe there was something to this after all. Too bad they're dead. Before that, you had individuals such as shamans, sages, hermits, which were considered to be wise long ago. Um, People that were a little concerned with the everyday goings-ons of normative life. They were more interested in the stranger questions, the more abstract. Many philosophers throughout history, Greek or otherwise, used to be able to walk around in sandals and just spout nonsense. Well, at least it wasn't nonsense to us, and then people would be able to pick apart little gems of truth and information out of it. And there was a certain value in society um, that was being perceived by even the normative thinkers of that time period. And of course, there was the others who saw this sort of abstract cluster thinking as a threat to stability of whatever structure was in place, whatever system of power was in place at the time. And what makes it funnier is that oftentimes people like ourselves weren't interested in necessarily shaking things up in a kind of way that would be what a lot of their ideas were taken as later in life by, you know, uh, I guess, subcultures and stuff that built up from some of those ideas. Revolutions stemmed from some ideas. I feel like a lot of these people, they just had these ideas because they were looking at things from a different lens. They were looking at the world through a sort of a different kind of window frame. They weren't looking outside and seeing the same clouds. They were looking for something else. They were looking past those clouds. And oftentimes, whatever they garnered gets mistaken for something more normative and then applied. And then you get paradigm shifts. But the originators of some of those ideas weren't even interested in how those particular um, or their ideas were being implemented or used for things that are more normative and concerned, such as power hierarchy and status, and yeah, more or less that sort of stuff. Social hierarchies and such. But my point is that I believe that we had a place, and in today's age, we have much less of one. Only if you're particularly talented or skilled at something that during that particular window of time becomes popular or interesting to the normative mind. In which case, oftentimes that eccentricity or art or science or whatever it is you produce ends up oftentimes being misinterpreted or used for purposes disconnected from its originator, its or the intent of the original source. And many cluster A peeps become essentially oracles, oddly enough, if you want to use those sort of terms, of information that isn't as easily captured by the normative mind because it's not being inhibited by the same motivators or by common understandings of human behavior. They're going off the reservation, well, many times with the thinking that they produce. Because as if you've noticed, many individuals, historical figures, were either considered highly eccentric, reclusive, had very poor quality of life, were so uninterested in what would be conventional forms of self-actualization that oftentimes they were stricken by poverty, loneliness, depression, misery, things of that nature. But yet they produced very interesting things. They produced things sometimes outside of their time. Be it artists, authors, musicians, or otherwise. Like I said, even the sciences. But well, theology as well, actually. But nonetheless, even then, though some of the skill sets that those people produce, even during their own time periods, were appreciated on a technical level, they were never quite understood as human beings, even to this day. Oftentimes, a historical figure that produced some kind of important work is described as being, eccentric, possibly dealing with depression, had mental illnesses or psychosis or something. Like it's always kind of like a footnote to the person, right? Footnote. It's like, oh, Van Gogh, for example. Right? Oh, Van Gogh, and they can talk rage is about the art, but his mental health isn't really like the primary concern usually. Right? It's almost like footnote. It's almost like, oh yes, he suffered quite a bit. He had many bouts with everything from depression to psychosis. It's like, okay, well, maybe all it would have taken was for somebody to be able to understand Van Gogh. even during his life, to understand what he was trying to express, to understand amongst his peers, or even if he cared about peers, but to be understood by someone. Maybe he wouldn't have removed that ear. I mean, you might as well take your ears off when you don't want to hear and you're not being heard, right? But yeah, yeah, that's what I wanted to bring up. I want that to kind of hash over on your mind. That we have our spot, we have our place. And many times the reason that this sort of cluster A style thinking gets out of hand or gets grandiose and can become toxic to the self, it's not so much because of the thinking itself. It's not the thinking that does this. It's the thinking becoming warped against the reflection of self in a incompatible value system. So you look around, you produce something, right? You have these ideas, you have these abstractions, and then you voice them. You try to express them when it's younger, and it's interpreted as all sorts of things that it's not. So you become dejected, you become withdrawn. Oftentimes, that's how you get people like me, and many of you, schizoids, right? Because we gave up on trying to be understood because we figured no one ever could. That's not true. There are people that can. I'm one of them. There are many others. Some that could understand you better than I could because of specific character traits and interests. And that's what the server's for. You go on there, you can find somebody maybe that can actually understand you, not just have similar interests. Because generally that's the best we can find is somebody that has similar interests so that we can stay within that realm and feel a little less insane amongst the masses. But we're not insane. I used to think I was possibly just batshit crazy because none of my ideas or thoughts were matching up with my peers or people that I even cared about. Just things weren't connecting. So it makes you feel as if you are the odd man out in every situation. The internet has allowed us to find each other, which is good. Anyway, I don't want us to return to a time where we had our place, but were only recognized on death, or on a century removed. But I also don't like this place that we've entered, in which we are just forgotten people, people that are seen as an inconvenience oftentimes, a wrench in the wheels of a normative society. I'm tired of that. We need to reach a consensus amongst ourselves about our value as not just as individuals, because that's something you have to work on yourself, but as a group of people that have a cognitive sort of similarity, if you will. And for the last couple of weeks, things have been really difficult for me. If you haven't seen my last one or two uploads or so, it's been very kind of depressing and very cynical. Not cynical, pessimistic. And I'm tired of being tired. I want to fight. I want to move forward. And I'd like you guys to help me because it's high fucking time people gave a shit about what we have to say. Because apparently we need to give a shit about what they have to say, right? So, works both ways. Thanks a lot, guys. And if you like what I talk about, please support me on Patreon. Yeah, I got a show. Sorry. Also, PayPal or whatever the links are in the About Me. And probably will be under this video if I bother doing it. And check out the Discord if you're schizoid, if diagnosed especially, but if you're not diagnosed and you've done enough research to determine that it's more than likely the case and you're just looking into it for an eventual diagnosis, check out the server. Go through the little process, and that way you can find other people that might be able to relate to you, and you can finally connect to another human being on a level outside of just, oh, we like the same stuff, right? Thanks, guys.